At a certain high school, somewhere in the world, there was a group of delinquents who always targeted one particular student to bully. This boy didn't have the courage to fight back, and he hated himself for it. Besides himself, he also hated the people who ignored what was happening, and those who let him suffer, even though they could have helped. But most of all, he hated his bullies. Just as much as he hated his own weakness, so day and night, he wished for a chance to start his life over. And it seemed that wish came true. When he was summoned to another world, he thought this was his chance to redeem himself and move forward. But it turned out he was the new savior, known by the name Yamato Takeru. However, it seems that was no longer the case. This world had a powerful being known as the Demon King, who terrified the people and gradually made their lives miserable. Thinking deeply about it, he had to admit that someone like him, who couldn't even stand up to his bullies, could never dare to put his life on the line to fight the Demon King. However, things seemed to change for the better when he met the Saintess Edelweiss, who taught him how to be strong for the sake of everyone. As a result, he accepted the fact that he was no longer the weak person he used to be, but was now someone the people of this world trusted and relied on. So, with all his effort, he wanted to make sure he wouldn't disappoint himself or those around him. This time, he would persevere for the good of all. At first, he faced many difficulties, as expected for a beginner, but after days and months of perseverance, it seemed his efforts paid off. It was all thanks to him trying his best, day and night. However, regardless of the good things he did, people still saw him as a villain. After months of arduous training, Yamato stood before everyone, now ready to be executed. Due to his overwhelmingly incredible skills and power, people began to see him as a monster. According to the executioner, Yamato was just another person from another world who held the power to defeat the Demon King. But because they were on high alert, they thought that before Yamato could betray humanity and destroy the world like the others, he had to be dealt with immediately. And as a result, instead of receiving support from these people, he was bound by magical sealing chains. Instead of getting recognition for his efforts, he was treated like a beast. Before his execution, the executioner asked for his last words, but before he could speak, the crowd roared, demanding Yamato's immediate execution. In that situation, Yamato didn't even have a chance to defend himself, let alone look back on his life. But until the very end, Yamato remained calm and didn't cause a scene. However, amidst the crowd, there was one person shedding tears for him. The one crying for him was none other than Edelweiss. She had tried to help Yamato with everything she had, but it seemed her power and authority weren't enough. Seeing her fighting for him, Yamato felt happy. Whether in Japan or in this world, he had never been accepted, but at least there was one person who cried for him. Because of that, he was certain that this life had been a happy one, if only he had been given another chance. Before he could reminisce about those good days, blood began to splatter as Yamato's head was severed from his body. But just a few seconds later, he found himself lying in a hospital bed. He began to wonder if he had returned to the real world, but that didn't make sense, because he was sure he had died that day. Moreover, the 3 years he had spent in that other world couldn't have just been a dream. Finally, he realized it was pointless to try and think about something he couldn't understand. So, if he wanted answers, he first had to figure out his current situation. Looking at his reflection in the window, he was shocked to realize that his body was covered in bruises and broken bones. Though it seemed impossible, he tried to use the power he had learned from the other world, and surprisingly, it actually worked. The pain vanished, and he was finally able to stand on his own 2 feet. So, the fact that he could use magic proved that what happened wasn't a dream. But the thought that he might be daydreaming still couldn't leave his mind. Suddenly, a woman, supposedly his mother, entered the room with a doctor. Seeing Yamato moving around made them extremely excited. Since no one thought he could recover so soon, especially when almost all his bones were broken, the sight of Yamato suddenly standing up astonished everyone. However, the strange thing was that Yamato had no memory of the woman who claimed to be his mother. Since he couldn't explain about the bullies, he decided to feign amnesia. When his mother asked what had happened, he just replied that he was messing around with friends on the school rooftop, the fence broke, and he slipped and fell. Believing him, the doctor went on to ask if he remembered his name was Kusanagi Takeru, to which Takeru replied yes. With everything cleared up, the doctor still couldn't believe Takeru's injuries could heal so quickly, something even a skilled healer would find difficult. This statement puzzled Takeru, as he hadn't expected healers to exist here, even though he was no longer in the other world. A few minutes later, Takeru's father appeared, crying with joy to see his son was still alive. He also said that even if Takeru didn't remember them, he was still happy that his son was safe. At this point, Takeru really didn't understand what was happening anymore. But since this was the first time he had ever felt parental love, he promised himself that he would find a way to return this body to its true owner. However, he wanted to enjoy this feeling for a little while longer. Although his parents were still worried, Takeru had to undergo numerous checkups. The results showed he was completely healthy, so he was quickly discharged after a day. On the way home, he couldn't deny that the technology in this hospital seemed far more advanced than anything he'd ever known. But his one consolation was that everyone here spoke Japanese. This definitely had to be Japan. However, there was a cleanliness to the city that he wasn't used to. If he remembered correctly, when he lived in Japan as Takaru Yamato, the year was 2000. To find out the current year, he looked closely at the news broadcast appearing on the screen next to the steering wheel. According to the news, that day marked the end of May, and they were about to enter the hot spring of 2040. This meant 40 years had passed since he lived as Yamato. But that wasn't what shocked Takeru so much. It turned out this world now had hunters, people who risked their lives to protect the daily lives of citizens. Some of the monsters the hunters fought were goblins, which confused Takeru because these creatures shouldn't be here, but only in the other world. To find out more, he asked his parents about it. According to his mother, hunters really did extraordinary things, because if a hunter was too clumsy, they could lose their life in an instant. The fact that they fought with magic as if it were normal showed that everything here was very different, yet completely ordinary in this world. Takeru realized that although this was Japan, it still bore too many resemblances to that other world. Not long after, a monster suddenly attacked them right in front of their eyes. Fortunately, thanks to the power he obtained from the other world, Takeru saved both himself and his parents. But just when he thought everything was fine, he was shocked to find that a spatial gate had opened. From the gate, groups of goblins began to emerge one by one. Based on what Takeru knew, goblins were monsters that even the kingdom's trained knights needed multiple people to take down. An ordinary person wouldn't stand a chance against them, but for him, he could handle them easily, because he knew he could also use magic skills. However, Takeru hesitated at the thought of showing his true power, because the nail that sticks out gets hammered down, just like what had happened in his life in that other world. Besides, this body wasn't his. If he did something out of the ordinary, it would surely cause a lot of trouble when the time came to return it, and he didn't want to be scared anymore. So he decided the only option right now was to run. But just as he was about to, he saw his parents nearly get killed by the goblins. With no other choice, he was forced to use his power. To avoid shocking his parents too much, he made an excuse that a nearby hunter had come to help. His parents felt relieved and continued to leave the scene, although it seemed like everything was resolved. Takeru still had another problem. After he struck, there was an attack from someone else. He wondered if this was going to become a huge problem. However, since his parents were still in shock, Takeru decided to ignore it and think about it later. Since their car was wrecked, they had no choice but to walk home. Although it was a long and tiring day, they were grateful to be alive. It was a major event, and the fact that there were no casualties was a miracle. After walking for about 1 to 2 hours, the three of them finally made it home. It seemed it was time for Takeru to begin his new life. As he settled in, he knew very well that if he wanted to live this life as Kusanagi, so if he wanted to live under the name Kusanagi, Takeru needed to gather information. He started looking for a diary in case the original owner of this body had kept one, but there seemed to be nothing. In fact, the only thing he found was a magazine about hunters. Showing the former owner's interest in them, all the books in the room were about this topic. As Takeru flipped through the magazine, he discovered there was even a ranking system for hunters, as if they were celebrities. Reading page by page, Takeru came across a note the original owner had written, expressing a desire to join a specific guild if he ever had the chance to become a hunter. After learning this, Takeru felt a little strange. Even though he knew he was in Japan, things weren't the same at all. He had spent 3 years in another world, so he was getting used to strange things. Moreover, this was the first time he had ever seen or owned his own phone. Though he struggled to use it, he enjoyed learning. But no matter how hard he tried not to be startled every time the phone notified him, he just couldn't help it. He even realized that he felt more anxiety getting a message on this phone than he did when facing the demon lord, especially knowing that the money for this phone came from Takeru's parents. However, with his mother's reassurance, Takeru continued to learn how to use it. Also, his mother didn't want him to return to school right away due to his health, which he thought was for the best, since his bullies had just sent him a text warning him to watch his back. Since he had a lot of free time, Takeru used it to look up information on his smartphone. He discovered that 30 years ago, after he was summoned to another world, gates had connected Earth to that world, and monsters began to pour out. They killed people, and modern weapons seemed to have no effect on these strange creatures. Out of nowhere, mages appeared and began to fight the monsters. They spread the word that magic was a skill anyone could learn, making it an essential subject. Thanks to this, people began to defeat the monsters. Those who studied magic were called mages, while those who exterminated monsters were known as hunters. Their roles became crucial in handling gate breaks and protecting daily life. That's what Takeru read online. To learn more, he decided to walk around the city himself. As he scrolled through more information, one thing was certain. Society had truly adapted to magic. The world no longer felt real to Takeru because everything was so different from what he knew. 40 years had passed, so people had grown used to these changes. Although he didn't necessarily want to go back to his own time, he couldn't deny that he felt lonelier than he'd expected. While he was walking, a woman suddenly screamed for help when her bag was snatched. What was more interesting was that the bag snatcher used magic to escape. With no other choice, Takeru was forced to use magic to catch the criminal. After a moment, the woman thanked Takeru for his help, but she also hid her admiration for his excellent use of magic. After realizing he was faster than he expected, Takeru reminded himself to be more careful in the future. Unexpectedly, the old woman gave him some candy as a thank you. This reminded Takeru of the time he spent with his grandmother in his previous life. At that moment, he suddenly realized that even though 40 years had passed and many things had changed, the core values remained the same, and he felt happy about that. On his way home, a bully threatened him, trying to attack Takeru. This guy thought he was a big deal, making Takeru realize that things like this don't change, no matter the era or the world. When the guy stood before Takeru, his instincts told him to fight. He kept ranting, warning Takeru not to address him so disrespectfully and that he had to call him Iraki-kun as if he were superior. The guy kept blaming Takeru, saying it was all his fault that the police suddenly came to his house, causing his father to beat him relentlessly. The man's voice grew louder, but Takeru remained calm, letting him vent all his anger. Inwardly, Takeru thought that for guys like this to still exist after 40 years, the owner of this body must have had similar problems to his in his past life. But compared to his past life, when he was so scared of people like this that he couldn't do anything, now, to him, fighting dragons in another world was far more terrifying. Compared to facing this Iraqi guy, Takeru felt like he was just dealing with an angry dog. It showed how much he had grown, and he even chuckled at the thought. Seeing Takeru laugh, Araki felt insulted and immediately threw a punch. But since Takeru was no longer afraid of him, he easily dodged every attack without even trying. Meanwhile, Araki was struggling. Takeru seemed to sense this and began to wonder what he should do. Although he could have easily taken the guy down with a single punch, he didn't want to draw attention, so he decided to just make Araki fall by stomping on the ground. That was his plan, but in the end, he still punched Araki when the bully started bad-mouthing his parents. At this, Araki became more furious than ever because he never expected Takeru to fight back. As a result, Araki resorted to using attack magic in a place like this. But before he could counterattack, a gate suddenly appeared. And with just one punch from a monster, Araki was defeated in seconds. Takeru started to worry about him, but it seemed Araki wasn't dead. Since there was no one around and Araki was out of the fight, Takeru decided to take down the monster himself. With just one powerful punch, he inflicted more serious damage on the monster than he had expected. After the short battle, Takeru closed the gate since he couldn't just leave it open, especially since it was like a summoning skill from another world if the magic circle wasn't destroyed. It was possible that the gate would disappear. And surprisingly, Takeru's theory was correct. A moment later, a group of officials appeared, prompting Takeru to leave in a hurry so no one would find out he had done this. When the officials arrived, they couldn't believe their eyes, because according to their reports, it should have been impossible for anyone to take down a blood goblin in a single blow. When they reached the scene, the goblin was already dead and the gate was closed, which was something they hadn't expected at all. Furthermore, as they continued their investigation, they found a boy who had collapsed, presumably Araki, but aside from a few bruises, there was nothing unusual about him. Besides, it seemed Araki had gotten into a fight with a classmate, so they concluded that he was the one who had done all this. However, the higher-ranking official didn't think so, because she couldn't sense enough mana from Araki to have pulled this off. Suddenly, she recalled the time she saw Takeru kill a monster to save his parents. And to learn more, she decided to head back to the Hunters Association to investigate. In her mind, the blood goblin was an extremely dangerous monster. The fact that a blood goblin required multiple hunters to deal with made her very curious about this mysterious hunter who had arrived on the scene right before the Hunters Association. This intrigued her greatly, and she wanted to know more about what was really going on. After a few weeks off from school, it was time for Takeru to return to the world of academics. At Kazumi High School, located in the Tokyo area. When he arrived, he was quite surprised because the place felt more familiar than he thought it would. Suddenly, on his way to class, he remembered the worried look on his father's face this morning, when he told him he didn't have to go to school if he still didn't want to. Deep down, even though his parents had said that, Takeru knew he was fine, and there was no reason to stay home anymore. In any case, the real Takeru certainly wouldn't have liked having to repeat a year just for missing too many classes, which is why Takeru came to school today to fulfill his responsibilities as a student. While waiting in the schoolyard, Takeru couldn't help but look around at the students chatting excitedly with each other, just like a normal high school. From Takeru's perspective, the school had a relaxed atmosphere, which made him wonder why the real Takeru had decided to go so far as to end his own life. If his environment was like this, there was only one explanation. Perhaps the real Takeru didn't have many friends. This meant that Takeru's circumstances in his previous life were quite similar to what he had imagined. However, the only difference was that he had gotten a second chance in another world where he could practice magic with others, exchange intense gazes with fellow adventurers, and fight or flee from powerful demons. This reminded him of what Edelweiss had said before, that she wanted to create a world where everyone could smile naturally. Realizing he had been lost in thought, Takeru quickly snapped himself out of it by lightly slapping his face a few times, trying to accept that there was no turning back now, and it was time for him to take the first step. Although he seemed nervous, Takeru knew he would be fine because he had dared to face this challenge thanks to Edelweiss's encouragement. With that resolve, he immediately entered the classroom where everyone was already seated before the lesson began. Before starting the lecture, Their teacher announced that from that day on, Takeru would be returning to class and that due to the traumatic nature of his incident, he was currently suffering from amnesia. The teacher informed the class that, for this reason, she hoped everyone could help and support Takeru through this difficult time. Right after the introduction, Takeru quickly went to his seat, and it seemed his classmates weren't very interested in his return. Then suddenly, Araki walked into the classroom, looking incredibly proud because everyone now thought he was the one who had defeated the blood goblin the other day. He was so smug that he even declared it was only natural for someone as great as him. However, when he saw Takeru sitting at the back of the class, he couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed, since Takeru was the only one who had witnessed the goblin take him down with a single punch. Instead of teasing Takeru as usual, Araki decided to ignore him, which was strange for everyone, as Araki never behaved that way. While everyone was focused on Araki, one student seemed worried about Takeru. A timid boy with glasses approached him and shyly asked if Takeru was okay. Considering he was suffering from amnesia, after realizing that Takeru probably didn't remember him, the boy with glasses introduced himself. "I'm Sawamura Takeru." Previously, Sawamura used to talk with the real Takeru, as they both shared a passion for hunters. This revelation took Takeru completely by surprise, as he never expected the original owner of this body to have any friends. As the school day passed and it was time to go home, Takeru couldn't deny that he felt more tired than he had expected. While it was true that he had become physically and mentally stronger after going to the other world, his intellect hadn't followed suit. Even back in high school, he always forgot to study. And now that textbooks were no longer made of paper, studying had become even more difficult. Despite his crisis, Takeru was still surprised with himself that, even with amnesia, he seemed to be doing pretty well. He quickly reassured Sawamura that there was no need to worry, as he was making progress every day. After chatting for a bit, Takeru asked Sawamura what he was like before, referring to the body's original owner. Without any hesitation, Sawamura affirmed, "Takeru is the best person in the world." The group of bullies tried to butt into Takeru and Sawamura's conversation, but it seemed Araki was teasing Takeru less than before, probably because of what had happened between them the other day. However, to avoid being seen as weak, Araki explained that he didn't want to get involved with Takeru anymore because it would only cause more trouble. Instead of targeting Takeru, Araki's group switched to making Takeru their next target. At first, they pretended they were going to the library to study, but knowing the bullies' personalities, that couldn't be the truth. As soon as Araki and his group left, Takeru immediately asked his classmates where the group had taken Takeru. Initially, he thought they might have gone up to the rooftop, but after everything that happened, the school implemented strict measures and closed off that entrance. This meant they must have taken Takeru to the industrial area behind the school, Takeru rushing off to help his friend surprise his classmates, since before his amnesia, he'd never been so assertive. Meanwhile, in the industrial area, Araki and his friends were interrogating Takeru, and every time he failed to answer, they beat him mercilessly. While all of this was going on, Takeru was watching the entire situation from the shadows. As much as he wanted to jump in and help Takeru didn't want to alter the original Takeru's life too drastically. He tried to avoid drawing attention to himself, as it could complicate things. However, when Takeru remembered how Takeru had willingly come to protect him, it started to get to him. But it still wasn't enough to make Takeru intervene just yet. As the minutes ticked by, Araki and his crew kept throwing and punching Takeru around as if he were nothing more than a toy, even taunting him to call Takeru for help. It was what Takeru said next that changed Takeru's mind. Takeru admitted he felt guilty for letting his friend, someone he considered his best friend, suffer at the hands of these bullies just so he could stay safe. That's why now that Takeru was back, he had the courage to make sure he wouldn't make the same mistake of abandoning a friend when they needed him most. Hearing this set Takeru's heart ablaze, as it was the first time anyone had ever been willing to risk their life for him. And with that, Takeru knew it was time to protect his friend. A few seconds after Takeru arrived on the scene, he suddenly collapsed, causing the remaining bullies to laugh at him, calling him weak, saying he wasn't even tough enough to be a punching bag. But to Takeru, his friend was as strong as anyone. When they saw him stand up to the bullies, the whole group was stunned, never expecting he'd have the guts to confront them. They figured his amnesia had made him lose his mind, and thought a single punch would be enough to take him down. But they had no idea that this was no longer the Takeru they once knew. With a single punch, Takeru easily took them all down, leaving them too stunned to speak. But Araki's lackeys were too arrogant. So instead of running for their lives, they tried to fight back, only to be utterly defeated. Seeing his cronies get beaten to a pulp by Takeru, Araki got so furious that he looked like he was about to jump in. But before he could, Takeru stopped him in his tracks, warning him that if he didn't stop running his mouth, he'd just be a nuisance to everyone. Instead of being scared, Araki's pride took over, and he declared that he couldn't let his friends think he was weaker than Takeru. This gave the remaining lackeys the nerve to charge at Takeru, even though they clearly stood no chance. He remembered a battle against the Demon King's army, where he was too naive and spared an enemy who claimed he was forced to fight. Takeru sympathized, but that moment of weakness led to the destruction of the very village he was supposed to protect. From that lesson, Takeru learned that once you commit to something, you can't do it halfway. That's why, from now on, he would never make that same mistake again, especially not when he was this furious. He decided to take down these bullies, no matter what. But before he could make his move, a blue portal suddenly appeared, sending the 3 bullies into a panic. And when an ogre emerged from the portal, the bullies froze, not knowing what to do. Ogres are the most dangerous monsters that can appear from a blue portal. But seeing Araki there, his friends relaxed, thinking he could easily take down this monster, based on how he'd defeated the bloody ogre before. Unable to reveal that he wasn't the one who defeated that ogre, Araki put on a brave face and pretended to attack the monster with his magic. However, just as he expected, his magic was useless compared to a real hunter's. In the end, the ogre took him down with a single punch. As a result, Araki's friends panicked and fled. Meanwhile, Takeru remained perfectly calm, standing off to the side, and just as expected, the ogre began to charge toward him. But with just a single blow, Takeru quickly took down the ogre. Witnessing this, Araki was horrified, even starting to fear Takeru, calling him a monster. As Takeru approached, Araki demanded he stay away from him. But it seems Araki misunderstood. Takeru just wanted to help him a little by using his healing ability to ease the pain from the earlier hit. Then suddenly, Takeru slammed his hand on the ground, shattering the earth with a single touch. He then told Araki to tell everyone that he was the one who defeated the ogre. Because Takeru didn't want to draw attention and just wanted a peaceful life. At first, Araki refused, but after a short talk, he finally agreed to play the part. Additionally, Takeru warned Araki not to bother him or his friends from now on, and also told him to stop bullying others. If there was a next time, Takeru wouldn't let him live. As the hunters were on their way, Takeru quickly left, taking Takeru with him and reminding Araki to do a good job deceiving the officials. At the Orin Hunter Training Academy, one of the hunters reported that she had been sent to handle the gate and the ogre at Kazumi High, but by the time she arrived, everything had already been taken care of. This hunter also reported that a single male student at the scene, presumably Araki, claimed to have defeated the monster himself. However, the amount of magical energy left at the scene exceeded human limits, suggesting the presence of either a monster or someone else. Seeing the way the hunter was trembling, it meant that whoever was behind this was no ordinary person. Finding this to be a fascinating case, the organization's chief decided to investigate personally, checking Araki's description and realizing that someone else had likely defeated the ogre. While reviewing the report, the investigator noticed that Araki seemed to be arguing with someone, meaning another person was at the scene. But when the officials arrived, no one else was there besides Araki. Could that be the person truly behind all of this? Although there was no concrete evidence yet, she decided she would question Araki to get to the bottom of things. It was all for the good of the people. And the person leading this investigation was none other than the S-rank hunter, Sakura. A few days later, the entire class, including Araki's own friends, were stunned by his sudden change. They found it both funny and strange that Araki now seemed so much more composed and serious. Even when his friends tried to tease Takuru, Araki immediately stopped them, leaving Takuru completely bewildered. But before things could get any weirder, Takeru showed up, changing the atmosphere. While they were talking, Takuru asked Takeru if he knew what had happened to Araki, since he'd been acting so strangely all morning. Instead of telling the truth, Takeru just replied that maybe Araki had decided to become more diligent, and that this was a good thing. As the bell rang to signal the start of class, Sakura also arrived at Kazumi High to conduct her investigation. Nowadays, everyone knows that all hunters are managed by the Hunters Association. So, the thought of someone with such immense power acting freely on their own made Sakura extremely worried. That's why she was determined to find this anomaly, no matter what it took. As she was about to enter the school, she happened to run into another S-rank hunter, Abikawa Jin. Also known by his alias, Orochi. Orochi immediately asked Sakura why she was here. But before she could answer, he cut her off, saying she didn't need to. Sakura then asked if it was all right for Orochi to be here, since he was the guild master of Ouroboros. Orochi was in charge of the Tokai region, so he immediately reassured Sakura not to worry, as their guild had plenty of excellent people. Just from this conversation, the tension between the two was obvious. In her heart, Sakura was certain Orochi couldn't be here without a reason. Knowing that Orochi's Ouroboros guild was famous for its aggressive recruitment methods, it was likely he was here for the anomaly. Simply put, Orochi was probably looking to increase his power by recruiting another talented hunter. As the two S-rank hunters were talking, they were suddenly interrupted by a magic gate that unexpectedly opened right on school grounds. Students began to panic, and the teachers quickly told everyone to remain calm and evacuate in an orderly fashion. Sakura immediately went on alert, preparing to head in and help, but she was surprised to see that Orochi wasn't coming with her and was instead heading in the opposite direction. He coldly stated that Sakura could handle it herself, and that he didn't have time to deal with such trivial matters. Orochi's words made Sakura extremely annoyed, as she felt he wasn't properly fulfilling his duties as a hunter. However, what Sakura didn't know was that Orochi had sensed something unusual. It seemed the magical energy he felt when the gate opened was much stronger than anticipated, so he wanted to prepare thoroughly before confronting it, leaving the initial response to Sakura. When Sakura arrived, the entire school had already descended into chaos. It seemed the number of enemies was far greater than she had imagined. Pushing herself to the limit, Sakura tried to save as many students as possible, ensuring they all got out safely. She checked each room carefully, one by one. Surprisingly, some students with combat experience were able to take care of themselves. After all, the skeletons and ghouls were just low-level monsters, so the students could manage. However, this strange situation could still cause trouble, since the students had never been trained for this. Therefore, Sakura continued her mission, helping everyone to the best of her ability. As she rushed to where the gate had appeared, Sakura was astonished to see Takeru creating a magic circle in an attempt to calm the situation. The moment she saw him in that room, Sakura instantly realized he was the anomaly she had been searching for all this time. Knowing he had been discovered, right after closing the gate, Takeru hastily fled from Sakura as fast as he could. However, it seems Sakura was determined to capture this anomaly at all costs. While Takeru ran at full speed, Sakura used lightning acceleration to quickly give chase. Sakura herself was surprised to see that Takeru, using only a simple physical enhancement skill, was much faster than an ordinary person. Even her lightning acceleration skill, which should have given her a superior advantage in speed, didn't seem to be working as expected. Nevertheless, the possibility that she could catch up still existed, so Takeru didn't dare to look back, avoiding revealing his face to Sakura. But there was no doubt about it. Takeru could feel Sakura's pressure even from this distance. Although Takeru could speed up if he wanted to, since physical enhancement is magic that increases the body's capabilities, for some reason, he couldn't. This was the limit of Takeru Kusanagi. If he were in his original trained body, he would likely be kilometers away by now. Even thinking more deeply about this wouldn't change anything. In any case, magic originates from the soul, and he had it under control, but being careless now would be very dangerous. The idea of training Takeru's body crossed his mind, but for now, he needed to focus on concealing his identity as much as possible. Using enhanced flight, Takeru instantly vanished into the air thanks to his speed. At this point, Sakura decided to temporarily give up the chase. Meanwhile, a few minutes later, Takeru was quite a distance from the school. Considering what had happened, classes for the day were surely cancelled, so there was no reason for Takeru to go back. On his way home, Takeru began to think that the person chasing him was probably a hunter. When he had looked them up online, he thought they were like knights or adventurers from another world. But it seemed the reality was quite different from what he had imagined. That's why Takeru decided not to be careless anymore. As soon as he got home, his mother hugged her son tightly, overjoyed to see him safe. It seemed the parents had heard the news about an ogre appearing at Takeru's high school. Since he hadn't answered his phone, his parents had been extremely worried about him. Speaking of his phone, Takeru started looking for it, guessing he must have dropped it at school. To his surprise, his mother said that a friend of his had brought his phone home for him and was now in the living room. Takeru's mother wanted him to thank his friend personally. The moment he saw who his mother was referring to, Takeru froze because it was none other than Sakura, who looked amused to see Takeru's shocked face. Despite trying his best to hide his identity, Takeru acted as if he wasn't the person who had just been chased and simply thanked Sakura for returning his phone. However, it seems Sakura had already seen through what Takeru was trying to hide. She stated bluntly that she wanted to ask him a few things. Takeru, still trying to feign ignorance, gave a forced smile and asked Sakura what those questions were. Without any hesitation, Sakura mentioned the incident at the abandoned factory yesterday and the incident with the blood-soaked ogre that had just occurred. At this point, Takeru realized he could no longer run away. Things were much worse than he had imagined, because now there was no way to escape. Moreover, he couldn't speak openly about the matter here, especially with his mother listening. So, Takeru tried to distract his mother, hoping she would give them some private space to talk. Fortunately, after a moment of hesitation, his mother left. To be able to speak clearly, Takeru decided to lead Sakura up to his room. As soon as the door closed, Sakura immediately demanded to know who Takeru really was. This left Takeru completely shocked, as he hadn't expected Sakura to be so direct. Even if Sakura asked who he was, Takeru had no intention of revealing anything. So Sakura declared that depending on his answer, she might be forced to restrain him if she had no other choice. At this point, Takeru started to feel that Sakura was a rather rude person, and he slowly realized that if he told a clumsy lie, Sakura would figure it out sooner or later. But even if he told the truth, that he was a hero from another world, it was highly likely Sakura would just think it was a joke. Seeing Takeru remain quieter than usual, Sakura's patience began to wear thin. She finally pinned him against the wall, putting them both in an extremely awkward situation. It seemed Sakura truly thought Takeru was doing something wrong, which was why he was staying silent. To clarify the situation, Takeru explained that wasn't the case. In fact, he had amnesia, so logically speaking, he didn't remember anything. But if that were true, how could he fight monsters? Moreover, he seemed to have a great ability to sense and use magic, to the point where he remained calm even in an emergency. Takeru tried to speak calmly with Sakura to avoid arguing too much. To make the story sound more convincing, he went on to say that he himself didn't know how he could do it. However, just as Takeru had predicted, this excuse went too far, and only made Sakura more suspicious. Unsatisfied with his answer, she pressed him on why he was hiding his powers. Surprisingly, this time Takeru answered frankly, saying that even if he had suddenly gained this power, he didn't want to use it. Because if he used his power, it would scare a lot of people. Besides, Takeru didn't want to worry his parents and had absolutely no intention of becoming a hunter. However, it seems Sakura didn't believe him, since no one would refuse the chance to gain high social status, fame, and everything that came with it. Without a moment's hesitation, Takeru answered seriously that he didn't need any of those things. All he wanted was to live a peaceful life. This took Sakura by surprise, as she hadn't expected Takeru's reason to be so profound. At this point, Sakura began to understand Takeru's perspective. As long as he didn't use his powers for evil, she and the Hunters Association had nothing more to say. Furthermore, Sakura assured Takeru that she would report to the association that everything had been resolved, so they wouldn't investigate any further. Sakura's reaction wasn't what Takeru had expected, so he was a bit surprised at first. Sakura explained that, although she didn't believe him right away, when she realized that all Takeru had done was protect others, she couldn't help but acknowledge the truth. The discussion ended there. Before leaving, Sakura apologized to Takeru for suddenly chasing him down and for being violent in his home. Seeing Sakura bow her head to him made Takeru a bit uncomfortable, so he quickly reassured her that she didn't need to worry about it. Then, with a serious expression, Sakura unexpectedly suggested that Takeru consider becoming a hunter, so that others could live in peace, After all, he couldn't hide his powers forever. But if Takeru truly decided to live a normal, peaceful life, then Sakura would do everything in her power to protect that, no matter what happened. Hearing those words, Takeru was suddenly reminded of Edelweiss, making him realize that there were still good people in this world. A few days later, Takeru decided to go for a run, since exercising helped him calm down. The school was still temporarily closed due to the recent disaster, so this was what Takeru had been doing for the past few days. On one particular day, in the middle of his run, a black gate suddenly appeared. The authorities intervened just in time to ensure everything was under control, as it would take a while for the black gate to fully break and for powerful monsters to pour out. Technically, it was possible to close the gate and prevent any damage to this world by defeating the boss monster. Seeing so many people gathered around, Takeru began to wonder if they were waiting for the hunters to return. He also wondered if the world inside that gate was another world, perhaps the one he once knew. The thought of entering the gate crossed Takeru's mind. Just as Takeru was about to step inside, the Windguard party appeared, catching his attention and reassuring everyone that there was no need to be afraid anymore. The much-talked-about Windguard party consisted of 4 members: Shiraichika, Tomita Yuichi, Amamiya Matsuri, and their leader, Gatu Mamoru. When the group appeared, the crowd grew much more lively. Witnessing their camaraderie, Takeru was involuntarily reminded of his time in the other world. Gatu Mamoru reminded him of the general he used to train with, which made him smile a little. Flashback. General Grotto of the Kingdom was the one who helped Takeru develop his swordsmanship and combat skills. However, no matter how hard he tried, Takeru could never defeat Grotto. That didn't mean Grotto didn't appreciate him, though. In fact, at the time, Takeru was a messiah, chosen by the gods, and Grotto was certain that Takeru's physical strength and magical abilities would grow at an astonishing rate in the years to come. Still, Takeru always wondered why he couldn't land even a single blow on Grotto. Grotto explained that no matter how fast someone was, a powerful attack always left an opening. It all depended on how Takeru used his power. That meant Takeru could create his own opportunities. Their conversation was going smoothly when a demon suddenly appeared out of thin air. It was a type of demon they had never seen before, leaving them both confused as to how it could have gotten so close. While they were still wondering, the demon found an opening and attacked, injuring Grotto. Takeru, paralyzed by fear, couldn't do anything to help the general. Grotto, who always put others' lives before his own, told Takeru to run immediately, while the demon was still distracted by him. But Takeru couldn't bring himself to leave Grotto behind. However, after Grotto desperately pleaded with him to go, because he couldn't bear to lose another important person after already losing his wife and son, Takeru found himself charging straight at the demon, slicing it in two. Even though he desperately wanted to run away, he couldn't just use the general as bait. And besides, Takeru had decided that he wouldn't be his old self anymore. With everything he had, he tried to destroy the monster at all costs. In the end, with sheer determination, Takeru unexpectedly defeated the demon, leaving Grotto utterly astonished. Seeing Gatu, Takeru was reminded of the general again, as they shared a certain resemblance. Speaking of training, it had been 3 hours since Takeru started, but his ears still felt strange. Instead of thinking too much about it, he decided to focus on doing more cardio to build up his stamina. As for his diet, Takeru decided not to change it, since his body had no trouble losing weight. Of course, this new body felt different from his old one, which was why he needed to make adjustments to avoid changing his physique too much. As he was peacefully contemplating his next training routine, the Wing Guard group returned. But it seemed there was a problem. One of the members, Chika, was still inside the gate because she had decided to act as a decoy so the team could escape. Gato felt he could never forgive himself for letting that happen. Hearing this, Takeru realized he was witnessing an alternate future of a past event, and if no one went to the rescue, the situation would only get worse for the group. Then suddenly, Takeru realized he was already inside the gate. Though he wasn't sure when it had happened, he had unconsciously stepped inside while his mind was in turmoil. Now that he was inside, there was nothing else for it. Takeru decided to find Chika himself. As he began to scout the surrounding area, a monster spotted him. The question now was, could Takeru survive this dangerous situation? Takeru felt a sense of nostalgia upon entering this world. He couldn't tell for sure if this was the parallel world he'd once been in, or if the forest was simply stirring up old memories. However, he noticed that all the monsters here were very familiar. After a moment, Takeru realized that this world was indeed the one he had once belonged to. Suddenly, Chika appeared out of nowhere, pursued by a one-eyed monster. In a panic, worried about her teammates, Chika tripped and fell, giving the monster an opening to attack. But before things could get any worse, Takeru managed to use his ice magic to block the attack just in time. Takeru's appearance stunned Chika. She never expected someone to come to her rescue so quickly. For his part, Takeru said he was just glad he made it in time. Although Chika had a few bruises, that seemed to be the extent of her injuries. To avoid questions about his identity, Takeru simply said he was a passerby. However, it seemed Chika didn't believe him. As she quickly realized the strange man was the same boy they had seen outside the gate, thanks to his identical clothes and voice. Chika's sharp memory left Takeru a bit flustered. Since he'd been found out, there was no longer any reason to hide. Chika, who was in charge of investigating and scouting hunters, had incredibly sharp observation skills, which was probably why she recognized Takeru so easily from the start. Before things got any more complicated, Takeru urged her to get a move on, since everyone outside was worried sick about her. Hearing this, Chika felt a wave of relief, as it meant her teammates were safe. However, somewhere else in the gate, the boss of this place was getting excited because the time for the greatest battle was fast approaching. As they headed back to the gate, Chika began to wonder how Takeru was so powerful, despite not carrying any equipment. Furthermore, the ice magic he used was only a basic level spell, nothing special. On top of that, Takeru looked like he was dressed for a trip to the convenience store, so it was highly unlikely he had just stepped into a gate full of monsters. This made Chika wonder more and more who this boy really was. In the middle of her thoughts, Takeru suddenly stopped, which confused her. Then, out of nowhere, an attack from the gate's boss came flying at them. The massive explosion and the chaotic scene nearly made Chika pass out from fear, leaving her completely frozen. Takeru had no choice but to scoop her up and run. Meanwhile, Takeru's power also surprised the gate boss, as the boy had just obliterated her pet and then vanished. This forced the gate boss to get more serious about the fight. Knowing things were about to get more complicated, Takeru asked Chika if she had any items that could conceal the area as they left the gate, and it turned out she did. As they neared the gate, Takeru asked Chika to keep his identity a secret, which she had already anticipated. Before leaving, Takeru made sure Chika went through first so that no one would see him. On the other hand, the gate boss was not pleased at all, as she still wanted to continue playing with them. But now that the gate was closed, all she could do was hope to meet them again next time. Back on the outside, the wing guard group was overjoyed to see that Chika was still safe. Meanwhile, Takeru hid behind the trees, checking to see if Chika was okay, trying to conceal his identity to avoid drawing attention. A few days after the incident, Takeru's classes resumed. At school, it seemed Araki had changed a lot, not just in his behavior, but also in the way he dressed. What was more noticeable was that the relationship between Araki and Takeru seemed to be developing in some way. Currently, Takeru and his two friends were no longer attending their old school, as their high school had decided to temporarily enroll the three of them at Urin Academy, since their old school was undergoing repairs after the disaster caused by the gate break. This came as a huge surprise to the three of them, as it wasn't something they had expected. When the incident occurred, each hunter training school decided to arrange spaces so that classes could continue. The curriculum would be adjusted to fit the schools, almost like a form of internship. This temporary academy was expanded to serve as both a place of learning and a potential shelter. This was the first time Takeru had experienced something like this, just like most people. That made them a little excited, and being sent to Urin Academy only made things more interesting. However, Takeru couldn't deny that he had mixed feelings about Araki coming along too. Immediately, Takeru reassured him that Araki wouldn't be able to cause any trouble here, since this was one of the most prestigious academies in the country, after all. There was no way Araki could act arrogant in a place like this. So Takeru advised Takeru to just forget about Araki for a while so the group could make the most of this experience. As expected, Urin Academy was impressive. The famous hunter Takamina Sakura was here too. On top of that, many of the academy's alumni were currently at the top of the rankings. Studying here was like a dream come true for Takeru. While Takeru went on and on about how impressed he was with the academy, Takeru noticed that almost all the students here were carrying weapons, ready to fight at any moment. However, his observation was cut short when Takeru started asking if he had met Sakura in person, since she was the one who had picked up his phone and asked for his address. Since there was no reason to lie, Takeru answered honestly. This made Takeru a little jealous. Spurred on by curiosity, Takeru kept asking if Takeru had exchanged contact information with Sakura. Takeru just gave a forced smile and avoided answering, and luckily, Takeru finally stopped pestering him with those questions. Instead, Takeru mentioned that he'd heard Sakura had a very passionate fan club and advised Takeru to be careful if he got too close to her, because there was no telling what that club might do if they found out Sakura had personally returned Takeru's phone. Just then, Sakura suddenly appeared, drawing everyone's full attention. All eyes turned towards her. Takeru couldn't deny that he was truly impressed by her presence. Even on school grounds, Sakura gave off the air of an untouchable flower, just as Takeru had described. This made Takeru wonder if Sakura had any close friends. As Sakura's gaze passed over him, for some reason Takeru unconsciously smiled and greeted her, which completely surprised Takeru, who never thought Takeru would act like that. Realizing what he'd done, Takeru felt embarrassed for a moment, and to escape the awkwardness, he quickly ran off to the cafeteria, completely leaving Takeru behind. After class, Sakura and Takeru had a meeting. During this meeting, Sakura informed Takeru that after he helped Chika the other day, even though his identity hadn't been revealed, as promised, people had started to become more curious about him. This led to many people conducting their own investigations into Takeru. Sakura also said that there would be a limit to how much she could help cover up Takeru's identity. especially with the Hunters Association in an uproar. That meant things were about to get more difficult for him. Based on Sakura's investigation, they could estimate the strength of the boss in the Black Gate based on its mana levels. When the Wingard party entered the gate the other day, it was a D-rank gate, and a C-rank hunter party should have been able to clear it within 10 minutes. However, an A-rank Cyclops appeared, which gave them a lot of trouble. Furthermore, what made the story more interesting, but also more complicated, was the unexpected appearance of an irregular, namely Takeru. Since he wasn't registered with the association, his appearance on the scene made many people ask, is this person friend or foe? Sakura also hypothesized that if an enemy possessed magical power as strong as Takeru's, it would undoubtedly cause an uprising. This made Takeru feel a bit guilty for jumping into the situation without thinking it through. Noticing she might have been a bit harsh in her approach, Sakura reassured Takeru that he didn't need to worry too much, because what he did was absolutely the right thing. Even though he had special powers, Takeru was still just a civilian who wanted to protect his peaceful life. Sakura gave a charming smile and asked Takeru to promise her that he would protect his own life at all costs, and leave the dangerous stuff to the hunters, because his parents would surely worry if he kept getting involved in situations like that. After discussing the important points, they ended the meeting. On the way back to class, Takeru realized that Sakura's kindness was the reason everyone admired her. He hadn't even had a chance to relax when suddenly, a horde of goblins started charging towards them. Seeing this, Takeru was no longer scared like he used to be, as he had grown accustomed to these sudden situations. But because of the conversation he just had, he felt reluctant to be the first one to act. After a moment, a group of Hunter students rushed in to handle the situation. Although the fight was quite a spectacle, what surprised Takeru was that this group was the very same Sakura fan club he had heard about. The club president, Yodoin, was more energetic than Takeru had imagined. This A-rank hunter party seemed very eager to befriend Takeru, but he wasn't particularly enthusiastic about it. Yodoin, finding Takeru's silence strange, immediately concluded that Takeru was probably wondering about the Auron Society. Even though Takeru didn't ask, Yodoin explained everything. Because he admired Sakura so much, Yodoin described her as a beautiful goddess who needed to be protected. Her admirers gathered together and protected the city. With its ever-growing number of members, the club is now the largest guild in the school, protecting the public peace. This made Takeru wonder if this was still just a fan club. Bayudoin continued to explain that the only condition for joining the club was to love and respect Sakura. Even if you weren't a hunter, just being a supporter or doing any other kind of work, there was still plenty to do in this guild. It was the way Takeru looked at Sakura that gave Byuduan the idea that perhaps Takeru actually wanted to join their club. From Byuduin's perspective, he saw Takeru as a perfect fit for the club, perhaps because of the powerful aura Takeru gave off. However, Takeru knew he wasn't good at dealing with people like Bayuduan, but it seemed Bayuduan had already decided that Takeru should join, especially after seeing how unusually calm he was when the monster almost attacked him earlier. Bayuduan realized that wasn't normal behavior at all, and it seemed things had gone further than expected. Takeru immediately tried to clear things up, explaining to Byuduan that he only stood still because he was caught by surprise, and that there was really nothing special about it. Suddenly, Sakura appeared, rushing to check if everyone was okay, as she had sensed the gate that had just appeared. Since the situation was already resolved, Takeru was about to tell Sakura that a group had already handled it. But just as he was about to introduce them, he froze when he realized the group had vanished. Takeru decided to just drop it and didn't mention them again. The next morning, Takeru was still wondering about the group he met yesterday. But whatever their purpose was, he wanted to avoid getting involved. Still, he couldn't help but be surprised that such a large guild existed within the school. Even so, this no longer surprised Takeru, as Sakura's influence had been clear from the very beginning. Because of that, He wanted to be more careful and avoid getting in their way so he wouldn't cause any trouble for himself. However, it seemed Byu-doin was very determined to get Takeru to join their club. As Takeru was getting ready for his morning class, he was surprised to see Byu-doin already waiting at the door. Although Takeru wanted nothing to do with him, it seemed he had no other choice, since Byu-doin was also part of the class. Throughout the lecture and even after it ended, Byu-doin kept his eyes on Takeru, which made him feel uncomfortable. On top of that, Takeru, one of Byu-doin's biggest fans, kept telling Takeru about the talents of the Byu-doin family heir, which annoyed him even more. A famous clan of spearmanship that has existed for over 1,000 years, the Byu-doin family was known for its incredible power, so much so that Byu-doin was once called a prodigy. In addition, he was one of the top 5 hunters at Uran Academy. This made Takeru realize that Byu-doin was truly exceptional. Even without the club, Takeru was eagerly looking forward to the next class at the Academy's training grounds, so he could witness Byu-doin's talent firsthand. This class made Takeru quite excited, since training sessions like this weren't something you'd find at a normal school, unless someone from the association came to teach. Including this training in the curriculum showed just how prestigious Uran Academy really was. During the training session, the school used DS monsters to train students in actual combat. The type of DS monster usually used was a slime, which, according to the professor, was a good monster for learning basic skills. These slimes change their form based on data fed into the DS house, which is short for doppelganger slime. When he saw them transform into goblins, Takeru wondered if it was really okay to let students fight them. But then he realized they were just fake monsters created by mages for practice, so there was nothing to worry about. As the training began, many promising students started to show their potential with each match. The professor offered constructive advice to help them develop in the long run. When it was Byu-doin's turn to show his skills, everyone was amazed by his incredible technique. After a few minutes, it was finally Takeru's turn, along with Takeru and Araki. Before they started, the professor asked Takeru to choose his weapon first. These weapons could be used by either hunters or mages. If the professor had any advice, he would suggest Takeru start with a sword. After all 3 had chosen, they got into position to begin the attack. As soon as the bell rang, Takeru and Araki immediately charged in, while Takeru stood back and watched. This confused many people, but what happened next surprised the audience. When there was only one enemy left, everyone thought Takeru wouldn't make a move. But surprisingly, the enemy was defeated without anyone seeing Takeru swing his sword. This showed that Takeru's sword technique was on par with that of ranked hunters. Not wanting people to think he was too skilled, Takeru quickly asked Araki to help cover for him, blaming it on the slime not realizing it had been cut. Although Araki didn't want to go along with it, he was forced to agree, which confused Takeru when he saw the two of them suddenly seem closer. Meanwhile, it seemed Byu-doin's interest in Takeru was growing even deeper, especially after he witnessed Takeru fight with his own eyes. The day after the training session, Takeru went to the library to find a way to return the body to its true owner. However, he gradually realized this was not going to be simple at all. Even so, Takeru had an idea of who he could ask for clues. There was a magazine he had received from Sawamura, which contained a story quite similar to his own situation. The girl in the magazine also went through the same thing, but her soul was still intact, unlike Takeru, who had no real soul in this body. This made Takeru wonder if the original owner of this body still existed inside him. As he was pondering this, Byu-doin suddenly appeared, clearly wanting to approach Takeru once again. After becoming more interested in learning about Takeru, Byu-doin concluded that Takeru was probably hiding his true strength. But instead of being shocked or worried, Takeru remained calm, which made Byu-doin even more insistent that he was hiding something. Despite this, Takeru didn't let himself be overwhelmed and simply replied that he was just an ordinary student with amnesia. However, it seemed Byu-doin didn't believe this explanation. To test it, Byu-doin suggested Takeru join him in a duel, but Takaru immediately refused. But when Byuduen mentioned Hunter Wisugi, the person who appeared in Takaru's magazine, he started to become interested in talking with Byuduen because he wanted to know more about this legendary hunter. Byuduen revealed that he had met Wisugi at a gathering of martial artists, but Wisugi had probably returned home by now. She usually took refuge in the sacred mountains, so meeting her was not easy. However, Byuduen could use his family's connections to arrange a meeting with Wisugi. This meant Byuduen could help Takeru, but only if Takeru agreed to a duel with him using some of the tamed creatures that had appeared on campus. Takeru and Byuduen began their match. From the very moment the fight started, the way Takeru held his sword and moved made Byuduen realize that his suspicions were correct. Takeru was truly stronger than he looked. However, Takeru couldn't deny that Byuduen was also very strong. But since they had an agreement, Takeru tried his best to ensure that he would win at all costs. When he used the blood burst skill, Byuduen began to feel like he was facing death, causing him to be overwhelmed by Takeru's presence, and in the end, Takaru was victorious. Instead of being sad, Byuduen was surprisingly happy, as this confirmed that Takaru was who he thought he was, much stronger and braver. Suddenly, the large pillar attached to the wall transformed into a minotaur. Takeru immediately prepared to deal with the monster, but Byuduen stopped him in time, telling him to run. Even though Byuduen now knew about Takaru's true power, he didn't want to let him bear the responsibilities of a member of the Orin society. Despite being defeated by Takeru with just a single finger, Byuduen understood that Takeru just wanted to be a normal person. As the club president, Byuduen wanted to realize Sakura's ideals and take on the duty of protecting Takeru at all costs. Byuduen also apologized to Takeru, saying that he knew he wanted to keep his identity a secret, but had unintentionally dragged him into a fight. To make amends, Byuduen promised to become a selfless and kind person, just like his idol. 4 years ago, at the Byuduen family dojo, Byuduen Soma, then a first-year middle school student, was winning match after match. The other students couldn't believe how strong he was. With such power, everyone assumed Byuduen was blessed by the heavens. Only the head of the clan could defeat this child prodigy. However, Byuduen's father was not pleased with his attitude. He believed that skill alone was not enough. One needed true strength. To mock his father, Byuduen even mimicked his words, saying that a person must always protect and lead others with a heart that remains unshaken by any hardship. Hearing these words day after day made Byuduen sick of it. When his training session ended, he rushed home, ignoring his furious father. Despite his happy and confident exterior, Byuduen actually loved being praised, seeing it as a special talent. Living in a large house and being good-looking also gave him a confidence that others didn't have. Although he appeared carefree, Byuduen still admired his father for his sincere words about protecting others. However, no matter how you looked at it, to Byuduen, a strong person was simply a strong person. Deep down, he believed monsters were easy to defeat, so he didn't pay much attention to his father's words. So, when the opportunity to face a black gate arose, Byuduen immediately rushed in, aiming to gain real combat experience to prove himself right. But the gate he entered was incredibly dangerous, making the adults outside worry for him. Even though they tried to stop Byuduen, there was nothing they could do once he was inside. They couldn't just go in and help him, as they would likely be killed too. All everyone could do was pray that an A-rank hunter would arrive soon to help. Fortunately, after a few minutes, an A-rank hunter appeared, telling everyone to back away as it wasn't safe to be near the gate. Meanwhile, inside the gate, Byuduen couldn't believe what he was seeing. All this time, he thought his skills were enough to destroy any monster. But now he realized he was wrong. When a monster grabbed his arm, in that very moment, he thought this was the end for him. However, to his surprise, someone came to his rescue, something he never expected. Byuduen started to wonder what was happening. Why only one person had come to save him, and whether this woman could defeat the monster on her own. As much as he wanted to move, fear kept Beaudoin paralyzed. Meanwhile, his rescuer was also struggling against the monster. But instead of worrying about Beaudoin, she remained calm and even asked if he was hurt. Even though she was the one who was injured, it was at this moment that Beaudoin began to understand what his father had told him about true strength. This was also when he realized how truly weak and fragile he was. But this girl, despite her injuries, flashed a wide smile as if she had already defeated all the monsters. She quickly ran over to Beaudoin and told him it was time to go back because everything was okay. That's why, finding himself in a similar situation with Takeru, Beaudoin decided to change, refusing to be weak any longer. He wanted to become stronger so that if he fought alongside Takeru, he wouldn't feel ashamed. Even though the Minotaur was an A-rank monster, Beaudoin told himself he had to defeat it, no matter the cost. However, Takeru noticed something about the way Beaudoin fought. Although Beaudoin's skills were clearly excellent, he seemed overly cautious. From Takeru's perspective, a simpler fighting style would be more effective, since his opponent was a monster, not a human. To help Beaudoin, Takeru decided to activate the latent magical power within Beaudoin's body. This was only a temporary boost, and it might make Beaudoin feel like he was about to die afterward. But Takeru was certain it would give him enough power to send the monster flying. After that powerful blow, Beaudoin couldn't believe what had just happened. While he was still in shock, Takeru began to check their surroundings and suddenly realized someone was watching them from a distance. It seemed the villains of the story had decided not to let Takeru out of their sight anymore. No matter what happened, they would do everything they could to capture Takeru, the one considered an anomaly. Even though he was stronger than an S-rank hunter, Takeru was still human, and he surely had to have a weakness of his own. The question was, how did they find out that Takeru was the one who had defeated not only the Cyclops, but also the Minotaur? We'll find out the answer soon enough, one way or another. Quickly, summer vacation was approaching, and Takeru woke up from a nightmare about his past. When he found it hard to breathe, he instinctively thought he was back in that world. But luckily, he was still here, since he still had to go to school. He hurriedly got ready and went downstairs for breakfast with his family. While eating, Takeru started wondering about his plans for the upcoming summer break. He had asked Beaudoin to arrange a meeting with Wasugi during the break, and Beaudoin had promised to do so. Takeru hoped to find a clue on how to return this body to its rightful owner, but as he thought about it, Takeru began to wonder if he would disappear forever if the original owner returned. While this might be a heavy thought for others, Takeru wasn't too bothered by it anymore, since he had already died once before. All he wanted now was peace. His thoughts were interrupted when his parents worriedly asked if he was okay, as his face looked very pale. To keep his parents from worrying, Takeru just said that he'd had a nightmare and that it was nothing serious. However, it seemed his father was still worried. Takeru's parents only knew that he had lost his memory, so they feared this could be a sign of another illness. They couldn't bear for anything else bad to happen to their son. Seeing his parents so worried made Takeru smile, because the love they had for him was truly unconditional. Because of that, Takeru became even more determined to return this body to its rightful owner as soon as possible. However, his parents wouldn't let him go to school without getting a medical checkup first. Instead of going to class, Takeru was excused from school to go to the hospital for an examination. There, he unexpectedly ran into the hunters from the Wind Guard. They were also shocked to see Takeru, not expecting that they would meet again. It turned out the Wind Guard had also been sent here for treatment, and they were now cleared to go home. Seeing Chika, Takeru wondered if she had really kept quiet about him to the others. Chika's expression was so tense, and she couldn't stop fidgeting, which made Takeru guess that she had kept his secret. The atmosphere grew awkward, and Chika broke the silence by cheerfully saying she was so happy that everyone was okay. To avoid any more questions, she quickly left. Meanwhile, Gatu revealed that he knew Takeru was the one who had saved Chika that day. He also shared that he was from Kazumi City. and that their group had always wanted to protect the city at all costs. They had been together since childhood, and Gatu was furious that things had ended this way. However, that also became his motivation to get stronger, and he promised that next time, he would be the one to save the city and Chika. Instead of admitting he was the one who saved Chika, Takeru feigned confusion, and Gatu immediately understood why. However, Gatu reminded Takeru that if he ever got into trouble, he could always count on him and the team. Before leaving, Gatu thanked Takeru because without him, they would never have seen Chika again. After a few minutes, Takeru's parents also said their goodbyes as they needed to get back to work. Takeru reassured them that he would be fine, not to worry, and that he would go home and rest. On his way home, Takeru noticed that many people around him were being overly nice, expressing gratitude or concern, even if they didn't say it to him directly. Takeru felt it was wrong to accept everyone's concern because he wasn't the true owner of this body. Moreover, he also felt a sense of unease. That's why, until the body's rightful owner returned, he would do his best to protect the people around him. Although he couldn't do much right now, Takeru hoped the summer break would come soon so he could do something about the situation. Surprisingly, some hunters overheard what he was saying, but instead of engaging with them, Takeru chose to ignore them. However, these two hunters were quite persistent. They introduced themselves as Yashio and To, members of the A-rank squad of Ouroboros, an S-rank guild. They were sent here on their leader's order. Thinking about this, Takeru recalled Sakura mentioning a guild called Ouroboros, and that this group was looking into him. Although the guild was prominent throughout Japan, there were many bad rumors surrounding it. So, Takeru decided to follow Sakura's advice and try to stay away from them. But when the two of them showed him a photo, implying that they would do anything just to have a conversation with him, Takeru realized that if he didn't cooperate, he might drag other people into trouble. In the end, he agreed to meet them at a restaurant. There, the two hunters presented some documents that confused Takeru. It turned out these were the conditions they were offering for this meeting. When Takeru looked over the terms Ouroboros was offering, they were truly tempting. They offered him an executive position with an annual salary of 50 million yen and many other benefits. In his heart, Takeru thought that if he had met these people from the start, he probably would have hated all hunters. But he felt lucky to have met Sakura first, because he had no intention of joining this guild. Takeru quickly refused the offer, explaining that he didn't want to become a hunter. Yashio and To, though reluctant, decided to use force to make him agree. Takeru calmly reminded them that their actions were quite violent, but the two of them were still determined to attack. Although their weapons were very modern, Takeru's skills were by no means inferior. Even so, the two didn't give up, even declaring they would hold back so as not to kill him. However, Takeru had excellent reflexes, easily dodging all of their attacks. Yashio decided he had to find a way to stop Takeru's movements and trick him. But even when they attacked together, Takeru was still powerful, almost on the level of an Estherin hunter model. Using his guard card skill, Takeru effortlessly dodged every attack from Yashio and To, and though they relentlessly threw punches and kicks, they couldn't land a single hit on him. Eventually, both of them were completely exhausted. Deep down, Takeru realized these two didn't hesitate to use anti-monster skills in public because they were that desperate to win. Yashio threatened Takeru, saying that if their powers didn't get the results they wanted, they would switch to taking hostages. But what surprised Takeru was that they had the wrong person. It turned out the one they'd been tracking all this time wasn't Takeru, but Araki. Nevertheless, things had already gone too far, and the situation had become much more complicated. As Yashio collapsed, someone called his phone, and out of curiosity, Takeru answered it. The man on the other end of the line was Yashio and To's boss, and he praised Takeru's incredible strength. He got straight to the point, wanting Takeru to join his team. However, if Takeru refused this offer, he would have no choice but to provide his identity to the Hunters Association. He didn't want to do that. After all, he wanted to make Takeru his secret weapon and would let no one else know of his existence. Knowing that Takeru wouldn't agree, he immediately sent him a photograph. In the photo were Takeru's parents lying in hospital beds. Takeru panicked, worried about his parents' condition, but the boss calmly told him not to get too angry. He had simply given them a special poison, incurable by any medicine in the world. The only thing that could save Takeru's parents was if the leader gave him the antidote, but as expected, this would only happen if Takeru agreed to his conditions. In order to negotiate, the leader demanded Takeru come meet him alone, which Takeru completely understood. He knew that bringing backup would only complicate things further. After checking on the condition of his parents, who were now in the hospital, Takeru immediately headed to the leader's location. As soon as he arrived, Echidna, the man's assistant, led Takeru to the meeting room. Along the way, Echidna explained that these restaurants were used as their bases all across Japan. And the place Takeru had been to before was also one of them. Takeru thought the meeting would take place in a normal room, but that wasn't the case. As he entered an empty room, Hakun, another employee, announced that the leader was waiting for Takeru on the other side of what looked like a black hole. Without hesitation, Takeru stepped inside and was greeted by a horde of monsters. These creatures were all under the leader's control, and whatever he commanded, they would surely obey. At this moment, Takeru finally realized that all the evil that had happened in the city over the past few days was the work of this leader. Surprisingly, the man didn't deny it. On the contrary, he casually admitted it was just an experiment. Furthermore, he laughed about how Gatu had been crying constantly after the incident, and because of that, he just couldn't stop doing it over and over again. Takeru's blood began to boil, and a mix of anger and confusion started to rise within him. Takeru asked directly if everything this leader had done was his goal from the very beginning. Without a shred of hesitation, the leader confirmed that he did it all to shatter the current rules, along with the guilds and the hunters who followed them. His goal was to take them down once and for all, and then he would rule the country with his monsters. Takeru thought this was impossible, because no matter how many monsters were brought into the situation, things would still be brought under control. However, for the leader, it was a different story. It seemed he had calculated all the consequences. Even with the intervention of S-rank hunters, he still had other secret cards up his sleeve. Unexpectedly, the leader suddenly handed Takeru the antidote, leaving him in shock. He said he had planned to give it to Takeru after showing him the situation, as he had no intention of making an enemy of him. However, Takeru didn't trust that, especially after the leader had kidnapped his parents. Instead of discussing the matter, the leader continued, expressing that he understood Takeru's feelings about having to hide his power. He claimed it was unfair that people like Takeru had to live in suppression for years, constantly imposed upon and controlled by the public. He asked Takeru why he had to hold back this power, believing that Takeru truly wanted to use it freely. The leader wanted to lend him a hand, to conquer the world together with their strength. Without hesitation, Takeru threw the antidote to the ground and forcefully declared that he refused the leader's offer. As it turned out, Takeru had already discovered that the poison the leader used was basilisk venom, and he had already cured his parents himself. This astonished the leader, as this poison had never appeared in this world before, and he couldn't understand how Takeru knew of its existence. Takeru bluntly demanded the leader face him directly, as he had come here with the sole purpose of taking him down. Takeru believed his power existed only to protect these peaceful days, and if anyone dared to touch the things he held dear, he wouldn't hesitate to crush them. This excited the leader, because he knew he was also very strong, and he didn't hesitate to charge into battle. Using his power, the leader commanded the monsters to attack Takeru all at once. With Flare Burst, Takeru incinerated them all in a single blow. But this didn't stop the leader. Instead, he became even more determined, hoping to exhaust Takeru's power. He continued to show off his monster summoning skills and force them to obey with magic. Takeru quickly realized that this was no ordinary person. but likely an S-rank hunter, so he couldn't hold back. Takeru continuously unleashed powerful attacks, forcing the leader to admit that Takeru was truly a talented anomaly. His attacks were even flashier than most. Realizing Takeru was a tough opponent, the leader called his assistant, Echidna, to deploy their secret weapon. At Echidna's signal, the leader summoned the terrifying monster he had been hiding. Hydra, an 8-headed monster. Takeru was a bit overwhelmed, as this was the first time he had ever seen such a monster and found it hard to believe that such a thing could exist in this world. When Takeru attacked the Hydra, the monster showed no signs of pain, making him think it was immune to it. But as he continued his assault, Takeru realized that each of the Hydra's heads felt pain individually. However, the most challenging part was that the Hydra could regenerate. As an immortal monster, no hunter could easily defeat it. Even so, Takeru didn't believe in immortality, as he had faced similar foes before. Everything would be fine because he would definitely find a way to turn this difficult situation around. From his observations, Takeru realized that for every injured part, the monster would regenerate that spot. So if he attacked the monster's entire body at once, he could defeat it. However, the Hydra was smarter than Takeru thought, and it was trying to stop him from gathering mana for his final blow. Takeru found the Hydra's attempts to block his mana gathering to be a nuisance. So to win, he needed to pay attention to every detail. After severing the Hydra's heads, Takeru tried to freeze them and discovered it took about 3 seconds for them to regenerate. Takeru planned to launch a rapid magic attack within this brief window. However, he felt that still wasn't enough, so he continued to search for more of the monster's weaknesses. After a few seconds, Takeru discovered the Hydra's weak spot was its tail. Using his power, he attacked and defeated the Hydra in a single blow. The leader couldn't believe his trump card had been defeated right before his eyes, but that didn't mean he was giving up. Although he tried to counterattack by summoning other deadly monsters, Takeru was stronger and continued to defeat them. He kept summoning other monsters to attack Takeru, but they all met the same fate, being destroyed at Takeru's hands. While the leader was struggling, Echidna decided to join the battle.